to the goggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. What's going on in Belarus? Well, if you read Western media, you're going to get a pretty much view of what's going on. As we speak right now, Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, has talked to the German Chancellor Angela Merkel and the French President Emmanuel Macron. And the gist of what they have said is that there must be stability, there must be no violence. There was no specifics of what they agreed to achieve those two goals. Putin did caution both European leaders not to intervene in Belarus's internal affairs. The situation is very delicate, and to talk about this, I have an esteemed expert, as usual, George Szamuely. One of the things, we've talked often about the forced regime change, the color revolutions in the post-Soviet space. We have the Georgian example, we have the Ukrainian example, but Belarus is very, very different. Let's explain to our viewers why.
Well, it's very different, as you say, because it really doesn't have any separate national identity of its own. Everyone in Belarus speaks Russian. I mean, Belarus itself, the name is White Russian. And it was a creation of the Bolsheviks, and the Bolsheviks' point man on the nationalities question, Joseph Stalin. The Bolsheviks had a vested interest in creating nations out of whole cloth because the Bolsheviks were afraid of Russian nationalism. They were very hostile to Russian nationalism. So what did they do? They went around the country and found different nations. Oh, look, here's a nation, therefore it should have its own little autonomous republic. Let's invent a language for them. And so they kind of created these fictional languages. And in the Caucasus, what they did was they made sure that the local communities were at each other's throats, so there'd be one arbiter, it would be Moscow. And we live with that legacy in the post-Soviet space today. Right. But with Belarus, I mean, Belarus is very tightly connected to Russia through treaties and organizations that are focused on security and geoeconomic politics. Much tighter than in the case of Ukraine, which was pretty tight. Keep going. Yes, that's exactly right. So Belarus is very close to the Russians linguistically, culturally, and of course, strategically. And given what has happened since the fall of the Soviet Union with NATO expansion and NATO gobbling up the 3 Baltic states, Poland, and then, in 2008, offering a kind of conditional membership to Ukraine and Georgia, this is a very serious issue for the Russians. And so when Moscow looks on what's going on right now in Belarus, they are very anxious that the West is trying to stage yet another one of these color revolutions, the end result of which would be the creation of something like the Ukraine government, which is extremely hostile to Russia and a de facto ally of NATO's. Yeah, but this is something we're not tolerating.
Yeah, but I mean, the Ukrainian nationalism is well known, and it can be quite nasty. Okay. Because of who it targets as the other to define themselves. And of course, that's Russia. But in Belarus, it's not so easy to do that. There isn't this angst towards Moscow against Russians. The amount of marriages and things like that. Dmitry Babich, a good friend of mine, his wife is Belarusian, and he travels there quite often. He feels at home, and he is made to feel at home because of his ethnicity and his language here. But you mentioned, Russia's anxieties. I think we need to be very clear and to make sure our viewers understand is that the Russian government doesn't have any love lost for Lukashenko at all right? I mean, Lukashenko has, since 1994, ever since he came to power in Belarus, has played to one degree or another Russia against the West, getting goodies, okay? But as he has gone through time, and particularly during a pandemic and an economic turndown, he's annoyed a lot of people in Russia and in the European Union, and he's kind of standing alone right now. One thing also we need to tell our viewers that a lot of people don't understand is that the Belarusian economy is deeply intertwined with the Russian one, and particularly with energy. Belarus, just by serendipity, I would say, has one of the most, if not the most, advanced refinery system for to refine crude oil for export to the European Union at a huge markup, and they just have the facilities. I mean, when they put it there, when they built it there in the 1980s, and no one thought the Soviet Union was going to fall apart. Well, when it did, Belarus had a little pearl in its hand, and demand for oil is down. The price of oil is down, and this was one of the things that Lukashenko did to cushion his largely state-run economy, which is anomalous for many countries, if not all the countries of the post-Soviet space. Lukashenko, he's kind of like, a Joe Biden character. Nothing will change, okay? Well, people do change, and I'm perfectly willing, like everyone else, to condemn the use of force against, in this case, genuinely peaceful protesters. But we do know that Western powers have been egging them on. We know that the NGOs are involved in this. We know that there are people that are looking for their cues from the West. Hence, what makes Belarus very complicated.
Yes, that's right. The economy of Belarus is very tightly integrated with the economy of Russia. I mean, Belarus has a manufacturing industry that produces for the Russian market. That's why much of these Western media reports talking about, the strikes breaking out in these factories in Belarus. Well, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, if somehow Belarus is out of the Russian market, these factories are going to close down. And then everyone's going to be out of work. I mean, it's absolutely nuts to go on strike.
Everyone should know is that the number, every person in Russia that has a refrigerator, there's a very high percentage of people have a Belarusian refrigerator. Okay, that's one of the things they also tractors, agricultural equipment, and they don't go. Belarus is way too small to support the size of those industries. They must export it, and it does go to Russia. They cannot afford to lose those markets. Keep going.
Right. And the notion that they could just somehow be a part of the European Union, forget it. I mean, these goods are for the Russian market. There's no way that they can start competing in the EU market with German manufacturers or other European manufacturers. It's absurd. So essentially, Belarus is part of the Russian economy. And as you said, there's the issue of they're getting cut price oil, which they then refine at a huge markup, big source of revenue for Belarus. And Russians were happy to do this for Lukashenko as long as he was progressing towards their common state. They set up this common state in 1999, and there was an expectation on the part of Moscow that Belarus would cooperate and move towards closer and closer integration with Russia. But Lukashenko hasn't.
The important caveat to that is that like I said, there's no love lost between Lukashenko and Putin, because the way Lukashenko looked at the Union Treaty, the Union State, is that he would be eligible to run for president in the Russian Federation. And there was one person that got into Lukashenko's way. That was Putin. I lived here at the time. Lukashenko's public profile in the Russian media was as equal to Yeltsin's, okay? Because there was a faction of people that thought he would be an appropriate successor to Yeltsin, which of course didn't happen. So, but I want to make sure to our viewers is that I have no, I don't cling to the hope that Lukashenko is going to stay in power. Far from it. The issue is that how is there a transition? Constitutionally, it is very, very difficult to do it. He has mentioned this before the election, and as late as I think today, he talked about it. Change could happen, but there isn't a roadmap for change. And there are those that will want to take advantage of it and to create an unstable situation, to create chaos like we had in Ukraine in 2013, 2014. And I want to also stress that there are protests. They're not as large as Western media claims, but they are truly peaceful so far. And so a transition is necessary. Even Lukashenko, speaking at one of these factories, has even alluded to that his time may be coming. But how do we get to that point? And I think that's where we need cooler minds, and the European Union needs to cool its heels and let the Belarusians work it out. Keep going.
That's why I think at this stage, what is important is not to get seduced by the EU talk of let's hold fresh elections, because I think that's going to be there's going to be a drumbeat from Berlin, Paris, and Brussels. Let's have fresh elections, and they're going to try and get Putin to agree to this, because if there are fresh elections, the West, the Europeans and the Americans are very, very good at pouring in millions, tens of millions of dollars and people and everybody into Belarus to rig this election. And Russians don't have anything remotely such a sophisticated operation to rival that. So if there's an election, then there's going to be some kind of a Western puppet figure. Maybe this woman in Lithuania will be the kind of a figurehead.
Or they'll just irrespective of how the election is run, they won't recognize the results. Okay, so that's one way to delegitimize. Okay, I mean, can anyone spell Bolivia? Oh, there were infractions during the election. You know, there was fraud and all that, and then months later, oh, there wasn't any. It was a clean election. Okay. That's what they do. That's part of their game plan here. The interesting thing for me in looking at all this is that Lukashenko's running out of space here. I mean, he was able to play both sides and get satisfy his interests here. But I think that game is coming to an end. And Russia wants to see stability on its borders. It doesn't want to see its own troops in Belarus. That's something that horrifies them. And I don't think it would have to be really dire circumstances for the Russians to do that. I just can't see it happening. But they do see that a leader that would turn to the West and be dependent on the West would seek some kind of NATO assistance. And that is something that is not in Russia's national security interest. Why don't you wrap it up for us here, George?
Yes, no, that's definitely, and that's something the Russians are very concerned about, and so that's why, in the coming days, we should expect some sort of provocative events, like, as we had in Ukraine, assassinations, snipers on rooftops. So there's a real danger that there'll be some bloody confrontation, and then all hell breaks loose, within Belarus itself, within Europe and everything, and then the pressure will mount we must have fresh elections, immediate fresh elections, just like in what happened in Kiev when there was this sudden drumbeat. Oh, we have to have elections, a transition government. We'll wait for 6 months or whatever, and of course, no one even waited 6 months. It was over within 24 hours. So I think the Russians really, at this stage, have to play a very firm hand, which I think Putin is doing. I mean, he gave a very clear warning to Macron and Merkel. I mean, this wasn't boilerplate. He said no interference, and Lavrov said no interference with Belarus, which is a brother nation of ours. So there was, in other words, they're making clear that we simply will not tolerate anything like Maidan.
And Maria Zakharov, the foreign ministry spokesperson, pushed back against Macron. Says, "Why don't you deal with your yellow vests before you start worrying about protests in Belarus?" We're going to leave it there, George. But here at the Gaggle, you and I and others are going to keep a very close eye on this story here. As I usually say, like, share, and subscribe.